I'm Norman Beer. I am the director of the Open Learning Initiative and the executive director of the Simon Initiative. You know, when we talk about the Open Learning Initiative is both a pioneering movement in open education, but also it is distinctly CMU. It's something that I don't think could have happened anywhere but Carnegie Mellon. So you got the chance to try this out at in 110, right?
So I am required to take 110 as a psychology major. And before I took 110, I totally thought that was a ridiculous requirement. So I was a little whiny about having to take it because I heard all these, frightening stories. So I put off till taking it till my senior year, even though I had known this was an expectation since my freshman year. And so then I was talking to my advisor about it, and she was like, you know what, do it over the summer if you're this nervous, because then you can just pour all your focus into 110. And honestly, the experience, I now understand why it's a requirement for psychology majors. Yeah. I kind of think it should be a requirement for everyone who goes to CMU, just because at least a lot of times, especially on the West Coast, when I tell people I go to CMU, every single person's like, oh, you're an engineer? Oh, you're a computer science, person? Yeah. And they're like, oh, well, actually, I'm studying psychology, but you're right.
Also one of our strengths.
I was like, you're right, a lot of my peers are. So I think it's really good because, I don't know, the CMU label kind of comes with this technical idea and this technical background. So now feeling like I've participated even in a super small part of it, makes me feel like I deserve the title a little more.
No, I think that's one of the things I was trying to get out into the class was that notion that, you really are participating in one of the, we have a lot of great traditions here, but I think that the work that we've done in CS is just, it's this enormous river, and maybe you're just dipping your foot into it, but you're a part of it now, and that's pretty exciting. I mean, obviously the course, or at least the way that we were doing it in the summer, and I think the way it's being introduced now in the fall and spring semesters, is able to take advantage of a lot of the work coming out of the Simon Initiative, which includes the OLI courses. And so I'm curious, how did that compare to some of the other classes you've taken, courses that didn't have the ability to use some of the ed tech pieces?
I would say in other classes where they didn't use OLI, which was pretty much every class except for computing at CMU, and if you took it in the summer there wasn't even a professor, so this is cool because it kind of combined having a professor that you could ask questions to, but also the OLI modules, and that's different because it was hard kind of doing the OLI completely on my own for the computing at CM, but with other classes, I'd say it's kind of tough. Say you are tired during lecture or something like that, or for some reason you miss a lecture, and lecture is really rich, but there's not really a way to get those notes, and I feel like OLI has a backup if something like that happens. It's not like you should miss lecture or anything, but in the case that you do, or that something doesn't work out, you're able to go to the OLI modules, and you're able to kind of get caught up, or at least get a buffer for what you'd missed, and I like that accessibility to have that.
Great.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think for me the OLI was really helpful because I could do it before class, and then I felt like I kind of knew what I was getting into in class, and then if I ever was kind of confused from the in-class portion, I knew that it wasn't the end-all be-all of that moment. I had to learn and understand in that moment. I had time and structured time in which I could learn it by myself or with the guide of the OLI modules.
Okay. And did you feel like the online materials and the supporting tech blended fairly well with the traditional class time? Did we get those synced up fairly well?
Yeah, I think so. I think I always loved at the end the question that was what do you want your instructor to spend more time on? Because at least the way you did it, you really talked about that and you really used that, and it kind of made you feel like your learning experience was being valued, and that you weren't necessarily expected to 100% understand everything that had happened during the OLI module or during class. So.
Yeah, and I think if that's used properly, it can be pretty nice, because I've just been thinking about this semester, people do not like asking questions in lecture at CMU because everybody's afraid that they're asking the dumb question, when in reality there has to be at least one other person in the lecture hall that feels the same way. So even though it would be nice to have that problem be fixed, it's nice because this gives an opportunity where you don't just stay silent in fear of being judged necessarily. You can just type in hey, this is me to you as my professor, could you please spend some more time on this? Whereas other ways, you might not have time to talk to your professor about that after class, in some cases, with a short 10-minute transitions, and I think it just comes in handy to be able to at least get that information across.
So I think that we talk a lot about the ability of the technology to eliminate the back row or to bring the back row students forward metaphorically, and I think that that's a piece of it, right? I mean, but it's also, I think, normalizing that piece of learning that requires you to acknowledge, hey, I don't know exactly what's happening here. I need to ask questions, and so it gives you a vehicle for doing that, and it ties it a little more directly to what you've just learned, right? So there's that close relationship to, I've just had this practice, there are things unclear, I can get that information out and then hopefully benefit from faculty. So it's affirming to hear that that it plays out the way that it's supposed to in the theory.
Yes.
Yeah, I think particularly the activity portion when you're not graded on, but there's the checkpoint at the end, which is obviously graded and important feedback for the instructor. But the portion that goes appears green if you've gotten it right or red if you've gotten it wrong, but that you can kind of try it again makes it a lot less intimidating, because if it's immediately graded, then you're still kind of stressed out by the whole experience because this is a one-shot moment. But the feedback, I think in particular, is really helpful, because most other feedback you get in a classroom is graded feedback just because that's the nature of school, but it kind of offers a unique opportunity for non-graded feedback.
For the activities, was there anything, any specific pieces of it that really stood out as what were some of the best ones? Tell me the worst ones too, but what really worked for you?
I think for me, the ones where you could actually code in Python in the module itself and it would give you feedback, I really appreciated, because the whole idea of coding, even literally just setting it up on my computer, was intimidating to me. So the fact that you could do it just like in the web browser and in the module, so the only thing you needed to focus on was actually whether your code was working or not, was really helpful to me. And then I think the other thing I appreciated, especially about that piece, is that so if you got it wrong, it would give you a hint and it would kind of like point you towards the right answer. But eventually, either if you did eventually get your own version right where your code ran, or you just really couldn't get it, the right answer was eventually given to you, which I think is really important, because I think sometimes in classroom settings, professors don't want to give the right answer because there's this idea you want the student to figure it out themselves. But if it's so out of reach that they're never going to get there by themselves, then that really only serves to intimidate the student more, because then they're like, oh, I'm expected to eventually get to the right answer and I'm not. So one thing I really appreciated about it was that you did get the right answer in the end. And even if sometimes if I was really stuck, I would eventually get to the right answer, and then I would just look at the right answer and I would just rewrite it. And that even helped me learn the structure of it, I think.
So I think one of the other things that's important about the way that the Larger Assignment Initiative works is this ability to take some of the data that's coming from your experiences with these materials and feed it back into the research space. I was sort of curious as to how that felt to you. I mean, you worked through the consent form. I talked a little bit about this. Does that change the experience at all? Does it feel important to you?
I think it's kind of cool to know that you're participating in something like that. And I think it makes, I don't know, I think it's a little motivating, because you want to represent, a student that's actually helpful. You know what I mean? If you, I don't know, for me, because I felt like I was probably not in the strongest half of the class, understanding wise, I wanted to make sure I was still, carrying through my part of the bargain, even if I wasn't understanding everything. So I think it does. I think it's a motivational thing for students. I know sometimes for research in psych, especially with younger kids, we worry a lot about what effect that has on them, a potentially negative effect. Right. But I think especially in a research university, it can really only have a positive effect, because it means that your learning experience is being valued.
Yeah, you're participating in that, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to be on the front line, or at least along the line of progress for a new initiative in general. Just I don't really think, like you mentioned, the consent form, it doesn't really bother me to think that the way I answer things, or how I do in the class, is being used in research. I mean, like I said, whenever I didn't pass 112, I kind of just had to be honest with people, and I think honesty is important, and it's important for learning as well. So no big deal whatsoever for me. If I had some trouble in one area, that's okay. It's going to help students down the road.
That's actually helpful too, though, right? It means that we know a little bit about how we can optimize the learning process for you. I think that so beyond the OLI pieces, there were the tutors that sat outside. So that's actually Kelly Rivers is a PhD student here, and she's been doing a lot of work on how to build software that can automatically give you hints and feedback. And the notion that what's driving this research is students participating in the work, which is being done by a student, really it creates a pretty exciting cycle. It says that the knowledge that's being created here is actually being co-created, and the students are an essential part of this, right? It changes what a university community looks like. So I think that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
So how, I mean, imagining that we could start deploying this kind of work more broadly, we could get more courses and more materials out. How do you think the use of this kind of stuff could change the experience at CMU?
I think it would definitely allow students to take more responsibility of their learning, in that because they're given this choice of when to engage in the material, it's a little bit more on them to engage in the material outside of class in a more kind of self-motivated way than for a grade, for instance. So I don't know, and I do think it really de-stresses and the whole situation of learning, because you have this other opportunity to learn that's then incorporated into the classroom.
Yeah, I think a really, really important thing for me, I think best conjunction was for sure having a professor and OLI on top of it. But one thing students, my friends and I have been talking about even this year is each professor has a different style of doing things. Some professors make you feel overwhelmed by how quickly they're moving through the material and everything like that. And as I said before, a lot of students aren't going to be willing to say, oh my gosh, that was too fast. Can you please slow down, or can you say that again? Because nobody wants to feel like the odd one out that didn't understand whatever the professor had just said. But I think it's definitely a better use of time to be able to somehow use something like OLI to allow there to be more of a connection between the professor and the students at hand.
Right. So again, thanks for coming in and being able to talk about this. I think the feedback is really important, and we talk a lot about feedback loops inside of OLI, and getting this kind of qualitative feedback loop is pretty important to the work. But thanks for coming in as well, because I haven't seen you in a few weeks. I'm glad you had a good summer, and it's good to see you back on campus.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.